I think that, a little bit about Wildflower was brought up, so it's great to see the progress there. It's going to be a long process to figure out, I think, what's going to eventually happen. We've talked about the waterfront study. I would certainly be in favor. I'm not sure what the waterfront study is going to bring back. Are they going to bring back what they would have brought back if our policy change hadn't been voted on in the referendum? Or are they going to bring back suggestions for policy changes? I think it may be worth looking into. I would look for city staff to maybe bring up a recommendation or possibilities on that. But I certainly also, given that it's probably going to be a little while before we get Wildflower up to our final, first of all, come to a final vision on it and then implement that vision. The more public access we could grant to that site in the meantime, I think the better. And I'm excited that's got to be open for the boat parade. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Singer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Mr. Rogers was talking about people not staying for the end of the meeting, I was signaling to someone who I thought would want to hear a discussion that he happened to bring up and I was going to bring up about the Wildflower in Silver Palm Park. When I had a visioning session in September, I reported back on the findings to Council. And again, the two most preferred slides of the attendees there were of rather wide pedestrian promenades along the waterfront. And I think that's an idea. I've already explored this with Mr. Arnell. Can we begin, is that something we need a waterfront study to actually figure out how to implement? And his answer was no. If we wanted to do a promenade along the water, we don't need a study to actually figure out how to do it. You just put in a promenade. It's not that difficult. And so I wanted to get the sense of my colleagues here. Is that something we can at least explore, and we can discuss it more at a future meeting? Because there are a couple things. One, it's just possible site planning, but two, to make that pedestrian promenade work, we'd have to get the county to sign off on putting a wider walkway under the bridge, which from my preliminary talks with county representatives, they're amenable to. So I'd like to see if at least we can get that going. So if it's a year or more for a comprehensive waterfront study, at least we can expand that promenade there. And members?
That walkway has been intended to be there from the very beginning. The second we bought the Wildflower property, it was always understood there was going to be a walkway from Silver Palm Park under the bridge and up as far north as we owned. It's always been intended there. And if we, the city, would like to begin to build it, fine with me.
Yeah, I think even at the proposed restaurant idea, that there was a public promenade with docks that
yes.
I was, and we never got to talk about that in any amount of depth because the lease never really came to us. But I don't see any vision of using that property that doesn't have a public promenade, and I would even say docks out there. But certainly the ability to stroll under the bridge across the whole site and enjoy whatever ends up going there is a very good one. So I am for the promenade.
Mr. Weinroth?
Well, I just would remind you that we have the Hillsborough El Rio project that we've been really talking about for a long time, and I'm sure that the people who have been working hard to get that moved forward, which will be on our consent agenda tomorrow, will hope that we get moving on that before we then bring this in. I have no problem with the promenade. I think that there is probably some conversation with our residents about putting the promenade on the other side of the Palmetto. I seem to recall some resistance to anything that was going to impact that parcel, but certainly I agree with Mr. Millay. If there was some way to create a sense of place and have this promenade along the water, I would have no objection to it.
Yeah, and I mean, that was always contemplated. The concern is inviting more people to park at the boat ramp, and a conflict between people parking to enjoy that area and our boaters. So that's always been the point of contention, that we would need to protect, the parking for our boat ramp.
Well, let me ask this then. Can we find, I think it sounds like we have consensus for staff to go ahead and at least explore a couple things. One, some possible pedestrian promenade while at the same time while we're working on the waterfront study, and also reach out to the county to make sure that we can begin that process. We did so months ago when we were looking at, having staff reach out to the Army Corps of Engineers about dockage. So I'd just like to have that begin the conversation and keep it moving forward.
Well, I think also the first thing is that seawall needs to be repaired before it ends up in the water. I mean, that's probably the most important infrastructure that needs to be constructed there, is that seawall needs to be handled first, and the permitting required with replacing that, so.
So, because there's a lot involved here. If we're going to do the promenade, the mayor's right, we have to do the seawall. If we're going to do the seawall, we have to do the docks, because it doesn't make sense to come back and retrofit docks later. So would you want us to look at all that?
Can you look at it
And
all, at
then-
least, you know?
Sure.
and
I would
get-
suggest
and-
also you need to look at some parking as well, because you
I
want
think you have to
wait
be
for people
comprehensive about this. I
Right,
don't
I
think
don't
you want to
think-
just put a Band-Aid on it.
It's like remodeling your house. You start in the kitchen, like, oh, well, let's do the dining room. Well, wait a minute, let family room, you know.
Well, can you come back with some staff with some recommendations from what we can do and maybe interlay that with the study? Because again, the study's going to go
Sure.
on for a while. But if we think, we've heard a consensus that this is the promenade part of it was always part of the plan, even if for the restaurant. I don't want to wait a year to say, oh, well, let's start on the promenade now. I want to at least
So
Work
we
on
could
our-
come back with a plan that would show some dockage, new seawall, the lighting that's appropriate, all the infrastructure you need, maybe some parking as well.
Well, and then that's going to take a year to get permitted.
Yeah.
Well,
with the,
I'm
with
not saying that-
environmentally.
the
so-
permits will take a while, we
yeah.
know that.
Yeah, no, but you're right.
We've already done the seagrass study, so we've
Okay.
addressed
No, I'm
that
just
permitting
trying
issue.
to frame it in a reality when
I'm
you're
not saying it'll
dealing
be
with
January.
the Army Corps of Engineers.
But we could get a conceptual plan back to you what this might look like, for example, a
Okay.
20-foot wide path with lighting, et cetera, et cetera. Because also, you know, we're going to accommodate the boat parade at opening the site, but the site is for one time only. It's clearly not safe if we don't have it staffed with personnel and blocking off certain areas,
Okay.
which we'll do. So it definitely needs a lot of work in order to open on a full-time basis.
Understood.
Okay.
Well, thank you all, because I think it's good to at least keep the conversation going. We'll get more specific policy initiatives. Like, the staff did great work with Lake Wyman. We had a discussion, they came back, they refined a plan, and we were able to move on it, and I just want to keep the ball moving forward. Also, I want to thank staff again for getting that site open in time for the boat parade. I know that's a great deal of work, but I think there's no better time of year to have that site open.